The following presentation was made possible by a grant from the Southwood County Historical Corporation and by Charles and Joanne Lester.
Hello, Paul Gross here. I can't help but wonder if over the years most of you have memories of a favorite location or two that have made a lasting impression. And perhaps like you, I too have a favorite location right here in central Wisconsin. And I'd like to share it with you. I call my location the Paper Village. My paper village is beautifully located right down there on the Wisconsin River. The village is home to roughly 1,900 wonderful people, and perhaps a few old soreheads. The village of Port Edwards, Wisconsin. The original name of the village was Frenchtown, a name that reflected the origin of the French settlers who came here to harvest the great timber stands and to establish the sawmills that once were prevalent along the Wisconsin River. But as the timber was stripped away, so too was the need for the sawmills, and the small lumber towns and villages slowly disappeared. Frenchtown was the exception. At this point, let's go over to Alexander House and call on our very special Port Edwards historian, Marshall Beeler.
Hello, Paul. Welcome to the Alexander House.
Well, thank
Come on
you.
in. Let's sit down and talk a while.
Good. Well, Marshall, if anyone can bring us up to speed on the real evolution of Port Edwards from its Frenchtown origin, you're the guy.
Well, thank you, Paul. You see, it was in 1840 when two industrialists, John Edwards and Henry Clinton, founded the Edwards and Clinton sawmill on the bank of the river here in Frenchtown. Clinton managed the sawmill on site. Edwards resided in Hazel Green, Wisconsin. Then in 1858, John Edwards Sr. sent his son, John Jr., to oversee the mill and several other operations that he had going in this area. In 1861, Clinton was murdered. The name of the company was changed to John Edwards Company, and the name of the village was changed to Port Edwards in honor of Edwards. Meanwhile, the senior Edwards had invited a banker by the name of L.M. Alexander to join the organization. Now, as the timber harvesting declined in the area, Port Edwards was destined to become a ghost town. In 1893, Thomas Nash, L.M. Alexander, Frank Wood, and three other outside investors organized the NEPCO Paper Company, and they built a two-machine paper mill just south of Port Edwards at NEPCO. It was a very successful operation. A few years later, in 1895, L.M. Alexander and that same group of investors, they demolished the Port Edwards sawmill and built a two-machine paper mill on the same site. With mills in two locations, the company took on the name NEPCO Edwards Paper Company, later to be known as NEPCO. Well, that's the story, Paul.
Marshall, thank you. What would we do without you?
I appreciate it.
At last, our little village was on its way. In 1861, John Edwards married Frances Merle, a school teacher. And in 1872, they resided in this beautiful home which was located on the property of the present-day YMCA building. In 1890, L.M. Alexander married Edward's daughter, Lida. They had 2 children, only one of which would survive, a son, John E. Alexander. It was a time when the village could even boast of a hotel. In the years that followed, electric power, sewer and water, paved streets, and a fire department were all a part of the village progress, so dear to L.M., his associates, and his maturing son, John. John graduated from Lincoln High School, and after his college years, served a stint in the Army as an airplane pilot. He's shown here about 1915, seated in a World War I Curtiss JN-4, fondly known as a Jenny. From the military, John returned to Port Edwards, joined NEPCO, and became their first chief chemist. In 1925, John was made general manager of NEPCO Papers. Under his guidance, many modern innovations took place. In fact, in 1928, the company bought a Ford tri-motor airplane to fly their customers to and from the paper mills as a stimulus for business. In the earliest days, the company had produced newsprint, but as competition from Canada began to creep in, NEPCO switched to producing high-quality wrapping paper, a very successful move. Then, of course, there was the Great Depression, a time when most paper mills, including NEPCO, were operating just a few days a week. Meanwhile, L.M. continued with his vision of the future for Port Edwards. In fact, in 1931, he commissioned a Chicago firm to lay out a preliminary landscaping and parks plan for the village. Louis Alexander died in August of 1934. He was widely eulogized for his kind manner and dedication to community and business. Following the death of his father, John E. Alexander became president of NEPCO. Having survived the Depression years, eventually pre-packaging slowed the wrapping paper market. And in 1937, NEPCO introduced a fine new line of writing and business papers under the name of NEPCO. Their NEPCO bond became the hallmark of the paper industry. NEPCO had found its niche. The paper machines were running at capacity, and continuous upgrades assured a superior product. All of this was reflected in the progressive ideas that John envisioned for Port Edwards and NEPCO. In 1933, the village prided itself on a fine new high school. The classic design blended perfectly with John Alexander's vision for the future of the village. Meanwhile, the NEPCO office building went through numerous stages of remodeling and expansion. Built in 1878, it was the original headquarters of the John Edwards Company, with a post office on the left and a small grocery store on the right. It was about 1940 when John saw the potential and visualized a modern new restaurant and recreation area for the village. The result? In 1941, the beautiful Paper Inn Bowling Alleys and Restaurant opened for business. Meals were no longer served at the old hotel, which was then utilized by the company as a print shop. Then came World War II, and like the rest of the country, Port Edwards was answering the call. The paper machines were running at capacity, except for periods of time when raw materials such as chlorine gas and dyestuffs were in short supply. And as young men were being called to serve in the military, women began to fill some of the jobs that once were considered men's work. Both sides of this large victory sign listed the NEPCO employees who were serving in the military. John Alexander personally took it upon himself to write letters to these service people and to send them cigarettes when they were available. When the war ended, the village got right back to its progressive lifestyle. The year was 1946. The post-war housing shortage was met with a fine new 8-unit apartment building, and in addition, John had a number of new houses built. Then once again the village prided itself, this time with a beautiful new outdoor swimming pool. It was just 2 years later, in 1948, when John Alexander had this to say about a new shopping center that replaced the old retail buildings in the village.
Successors wants to extend its congratulations to the peoples of this community itself, realizing it is only through their desire and patronage that our new shopping center can be a complete success.
Even in retirement, Port Edwards was still home to older residents, and as new generations emerged, the landscape was gradually filled with more neat homes and well-groomed lawns, so much a part of the Port Edwards that the Alexanders had always envisioned. Meanwhile, John Alexander was privately working on another great idea for his beloved village, an idea that he first shared with his wife Dorothy, who was so much a part of the village progress. The year was 1956. John was planning to build a beautiful new YMCA right here in Port Edwards, a facility that all of central Wisconsin could be proud of. A working plan was not long in coming, and the announcement was made in the January 11th, 1957 issue of the Wisconsin Rapids Tribune. By now the concept was in full swing. Architect Donald Hogan presented a model of the building, which was prominently displayed at numerous area locations. John called upon many prominent people to help guide the project and relied heavily on the expertise of NEPCO personnel. A large part of the project was covered by financial support from area businesses, Consolidated Papers, Preway, and transport companies, just to name a few, as well as by private individuals and service groups. It was on September 21st, 1958, when the John E. Alexander Southwood County YMCA was dedicated and opened to the public. Here it was at last, year-round healthful exercise from swimming to golf, from banquets to basketball. The new Y had it all. John's greatest dream and gift to the people of Southwood County had been realized. The Y director was Ray Passion, an experienced Y associate. for this proud little village? Well, you see, as the NEPCO paper company grew, so did their office building, where a lot of remodeling and expansion had taken place over the years.
So finally it was determined that the old building had reached its limits. It was obvious that a brand new modern complex would be the answer. The new structure would be built on the property of the Paper Inn and the old hotel area.
You see, the Paper Inn restaurant had moved into the new YMCA building, and as for the alleys, bowling had dropped off dramatically with the advent of television.
Construction began in 1960. John is shown here placing a sealed box of documents into the cornerstone. The pride of Port Edwards continued to manifest itself when in 1961, Necousa Edwards dedicated this beautiful new office building, world headquarters of the Necousa Edwards Paper Company. John reasoned that a building of this stature was not complete without a fountain, and so it was, in a park-like setting, a beautiful fountain with ever-changing patterns and a nightly display of color and music further enhanced the area. After the old office building was demolished, John Edwards' memorial statue was put in its place, and the entire area was landscaped as a beautiful riverside park. John and Dorothy, approaching retirement age, were taking great interest in seeing the world. Their chosen mode of travel was aboard their favorite vessel, a Norwegian cruise ship, the Bergensfjord. On these trips, John was always armed with a 16mm Bell & Howell movie camera, Dorothy with her stereo Kodak. After each world cruise, with the help of local talent, John would put together a travelogue and present the film to appreciative audiences in the Consolidated Room at the Y.
John felt comfortable taking leave from NEPCO. After all, the company was in the capable hands of his two son-in-laws, Sam Casey and Jerry Veneman. LM would have been proud.
In fact, in 1962, upon the semi-retirement of John Alexander, Sam Casey was appointed president. All was well in the paper village, and then one day it was learned that John had cancer. As one can well imagine, John tackled the problem head-on, but to no avail. He died on December 11, 1963, at University Hospital, Madison, Wisconsin. Now, after almost 40 years, NEPCO would carry on without him. President Sam Casey picked up where John left off. NEPCO continued to prosper. The paper machines went through various upgrades, and production was running at capacity. The village, too, continued to prosper.
In March of 1970, NEPCO made a bold move when they partnered with Great Northern Corporation. The two companies had much to offer each other. NEPCO had a tremendous distribution system, and Great Northern had massive financial strength.
From now on, the company would be known as Great Northern Necousa Corporation. Some employees worried about job security, but their concerns quickly subsided.
After the merger, Sam Casey was made general manager of Great Northern Necousa and moved to Stamford, Connecticut.
Jerry Veneman was then made president of the Port Edwards Necousa division. In October of that same year, Sam Casey was promoted to president of Great Northern Necousa.
Sam also served in positions of leadership in several pulp and paper associations. He retired as president of Great Northern in 1985.
In 1980, Jerry Veneman was named Papermaker of the Year by the American Paper Institute. In 1984, he was further honored as Citizen of the Year by the Wisconsin Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce. Jerry retired in 1985 and was succeeded by James Crump. In the years that followed, the village continued to reflect the good life. Backing up a little, it was in 1947 that John and Dorothy Alexander established the Alexander Foundation, which along with NEPCO had much to do with the village progress over the years.
The foundation continued to be an important stimulus to the village, a tradition carried on by John and Dorothy's offspring, the Casey, Benjamin, Lester, McCormick, and Keller families and their children.
In addition, Charles and Joanne Lester have sponsored a number of libraries in the central Wisconsin area. The NEPCO Library is a fine example of their generosity. It was in 1990 that the Alexander Foundation established Alexander House, a history and art center for all of Southwood County to enjoy. Priceless records and displays from logging days to the refinement of NEPCO papermaking are on continuous display, and fine art exhibits are presented on a regular basis. You might say disaster struck in January of 1990 when the Georgia Pacific Company announced that it was about to take over Great Northern NEPCO. The unfriendly maneuver was met with strong opposition by Great Northern NEPCO, but in the end, Georgia Pacific would prevail. Georgia Pacific President Ron Hogan presented his company's plan at the Meade Hotel on January 8th before the Wisconsin Rapids Rotary Club and an overflowing volume of guests.
The combination of Georgia Pacific and Great Northern NEPCO will create the type of stronger and more flexible company required to survive in an even more competitive and global market. Georgia Pacific intends to acquire Great Northern and to make the combination work. We have a great deal of respect for Great Northern's management.
Some of the Great Northern NEPCO shareholders were very upset when told that they must sell their shares at a first offer of $54. They could not be traded for Georgia Pacific shares. Jim Crump was no longer president as the company went to a mill manager system. The paper mill continued to run at capacity, but there was no room for frills. The beautiful fountain at the administration building was shut down and the area paved over for parking. The main portion of the fountain is now located on the Alexander House property. Once again, on October 3rd of 1993, the village had reason to be proud. This time it was the dedication of a beautiful new YMCA fitness center. Here now was the most up-to-date facility the industry had to offer, a modern extension of the beautiful 1958 YMCA.
In the years that followed, employment was good, and as we entered the 21st century, villagers were upbeat. Community spirit was very much alive.
Then, out of the blue, on October 13th of 2001, Georgia Pacific announced that the paper mills were sold to the Canadian firm Domtar. Once again, there was concern about job security, and once again, those concerns were put to rest. Even as cheap import papers began to flood the market, not to worry. After all, these upgraded machines were turning out a product far superior to what was coming into the country.
In spite of this positive outlook, on July 31st of 2007, number 5 machine was permanently shut down, idling 30 workers.
Yet Domtar was a friendly employer, and the paper village carried on as usual. And then suddenly, on December 14th, 2007, one short headline said it all. Shutdown of the Port Edwards Mill was scheduled to take place in the spring of 2008. over 500 jobs would be lost. And as one person put it, a lot of people are sitting home in a daze tonight. A lot of wives are crying. And a lot of people will not sleep tonight because they're not sure if they can pay their mortgage in a few months. More headlines followed as villagers searched for answers. Letters began to appear in the newspaper, like this one from Joyce Zier Hafner.
The closing of NEPCO paper mill in Port Edwards, with the last employees to leave in June, makes me very sad. In fact, Mr. Alexander must be rolling over in his grave. I have so many wonderful memories of my younger years while living in Port Edwards. How wonderful Mr. Alexander treated the children and employees of NEPCO. In fact, my father was a blacksmith there for over 45 years. There was a Boys and Girls Club of Nekoosa in Port Edwards every summer when school was out. Each group got 2 weeks of camp at the NEPCO Lake Lodge and cabins, free with all meals, creative activities, sports, and swimming. Then a big swimming pool was built there, and years later the fabulous YMCA and inside pool. What fantastic additions to our small village. The week after graduation from high school, Mr. Harry Dio met up with me after church on Sunday and said to come into the original main office on Monday and start work in the accounting and payroll department. A few years later, a beautiful new main office was built. But the sad thing about that was I was sorry that the 6 nice bowling lanes and restaurant, the Paper Inn, was taken down to make room for the large office building. All 3 of my brothers worked there during the summer while they were in college. My brother Don continued on there for over 40 years. After 14 years with NEPCO, I left to get married and start a family. That's my story. I was so grateful for how wonderful that paper mill was to me and all their employees. I forgive the teardrops that fall as I sign my name to this letter for the closing of the Port Edwards paper mill.
Local union, state, and federal agencies stepped up to assist laid-off workers and their families in search of a new beginning. Mid-State Technical College experienced a large increase in enrollment as Domtar employees searched for new direction and training. The headlines continued. Outwardly, the paper village appeared as always, neat and peaceful. For sale signs were few in number. Port Edwards. This is their home. Few residents could imagine leaving.
A few days before the great machines were scheduled to shut down, my friend Phil Brown joined me as we went to the mill area, hopefully to interview a few employees.
Good morning. I'm Phil Brown with the Southwood County Historical Society, and we're here at the Port Edwards Mill, Domtar's Port Edwards Mill, on Friday, June 27th, 2008. Today, we're just documenting some of the last workers coming out of the Domtar mill here at the Port Edwards. So today we have
Chris Rangel.
Chris Rangel. And Chris, how long have you been with the Port Edwards mill?
8.5 years.
Okay. Were you associated with you're one of the electricians?
Yes, I am.
So in the 8.5 years, you've been doing mainly electrical work?
Yep, shift work. Taking care of the whole mill, generally on off shifts and on day shift.
So the next few weeks will be the shutting down or the dismantling of the...
Yeah, that's actually going on right now. Some of it, some of the sheeters and stuff like that. Everything is pretty much shut down. There's no paper machines running. A couple sheeters are going down to their mill in Chicago. But other than that, I know they're probably going to be just general maintenance and pulling stuff out, I think, over the next few weeks.
Are you married?
Yes, I am.
Children?
Yep, 2, and just had one about a month ago.
Oh, congratulations. This has got to be a tough time for you.
Oh, definitely.
And our whole community goes out to people like you. Any future plans that you may have?
Find a job.
Find a job. And your name is?
Dennis Sepia.
Nice to meet you, Dennis. Thank you for talking to us today. How long have you been an employee of Domtar?
Domtar, since we become Domtar, I was with 4 different companies, starting with Nakusa Papers, Great Northern, and Georgia Pacific, and then finally Domtar. So a total of 31 years.
31 years with the company. Well, that's wonderful. It's got to be a tough day today for you.
Lots of mixed emotions, yeah.
Lots of mixed emotions.
Yeah, it's been a lot of mixed emotions for actually the last several months, actually.
Yeah. And what have you been doing lately at helping the winding down of the mill? There have been some projects that you've been assigned to?
Yeah, we've been trying to time everything on the paper machines and converting sheeters so that we can run everything out at approximately the right time, which would be about now. Between last night and this morning, everything is down.
Everything's down. And any plans for the future? Are you going to be able to work in Nakusa, or have you been looking at some of the other?
My initial plan is to take a vacation, and plan B is I need to look for a new career, and outside the paper business is what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate the time talking to us today, and best of luck to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After 112 years, the machines in the Port Edwards mill stopped running. As one person said, having walked through the mill for the last time, the silence was deafening. There were signs that a new company would take over the mill, but as the months passed and the economy slowed, there were no takers. In spite of it all, the spirit of the village could not be broken, as is in evidence in so many ways, like school sportsmanship, the vigorous YMCA, and annual events like the Port Edwards Garage Sale Days, the Fun Fest and Auto Show. As summer turned to fall, the autumn leaves yielded to a long, quiet winter. After 112 years, the paper mill was silent. But by the summer of 2009, the village seemed to adjust. Surprisingly, school enrollment had declined much less than expected, and residential sales signs were at a minimum. After the mill was shut down, the property was surrounded by a chain-link fence. Now, a guarded gate was the only access to the area where workers once arrived and departed freely. Even the parking area of the administration building was closed to traffic. John would have been crushed. The tall stacks that once were active exhausts now served only as monuments to the past. The NEPCO name firmly set in white brick on one of the stacks still defies the names of owners that followed Nakusa Papers. And as the beautiful administration building stands proud and ready for the next occupant, one can only wonder who it will be. Surely it will be a welcome guest to this very proud village. I'm Paul Gross. Thanks for listening.